Chapter 1. The first strange Nessie never believed in ghosts, paranormal activities, or any supernatural nonsense. Those were just stories people told to scare themselves. I was always the rational type, someone who needed evidence before believing in anything unusual. But that changed the night. I noticed something wrong with my shadow. I lived alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. My life was nothing extraordinary. Work during the day, movies or video games at night, and the occasional meetup with friends on the weekend. It was a routine, predictable life. One evening, after a long day at work, I was washing dishes in my dimly lit kitchen. The warm glow of the ceiling light cast my shadow onto the wall. It was nothing unusual, just a dark silhouette mimicking my every move. Until it didn't. At first, it was subtle. I moved my hand to rinse a plate, and for a fraction of a second, my shadow lagged behind. It followed, but with the tiniest delay. I blinked and waved my hand again. The shadow copied me, almost perfectly, but I could swear it was a little too slow. I shook my head, chuckling at myself. I must be exhausted. Still, a weird unease settled in my stomach. I chalked it up to overthinking, finished washing the dishes, and went to bed, forcing myself to forget about it. But that was just the beginning. Chapter 2. Something is watching. The next morning, I had almost convinced myself that what I saw was just a trick of the light. Maybe my mind was playing games with me. A side effect of exhaustion. But that illusion shattered when I noticed it again. It happened while I was brushing my teeth. The bathroom light was bright, casting my shadow onto the white tiles. As I moved my arm up to rinse, I saw it. The delay. My shadow lifted its arm a split second too late. A chill ran down my spine. I stood frozen, staring at my own reflection, then at the shadow on the wall. Slowly, I raised my other arm. The shadow hesitated. I took a step forward. The shadow followed, but something was off. It felt off. I leaned closer to the mirror, studying my face, trying to convince myself it was nothing. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The shadow twitched. I stumbled backward, knocking over my toothbrush. My heart pounded in my chest. No. This was impossible. Shadows don't move on their own. They can't. I flicked off the bathroom light and ran out. I didn't return to the bathroom for the rest of the day. Chapter 3. The Stranger in the Zion. That night, I decided to test it. I set up my phone on a tripod and stood in front of the bedroom mirror, the dim glow from my bedside lamp casting a clear shadow against the wall. I lifted my arm slowly. My shadow mimicked me. This time, with no delay. Maybe it was all in my head. But just as I exhaled in relief, I saw it move. Not the way a shadow should. Not in response to my movements. It tilted its head, as if studying me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The shadow's head tilted a little more. I turned my actual head to the side, ever so slightly. The shadow didn't. I felt the blood drain from my face. Then, without warning, my phone screen glitched. The camera feed distorted for a split second, long enough for me to see something impossible. For that brief moment, my shadow wasn't mine. It had eyes, hollow, sunken eyes, and it was smiling. I snatched my phone and turned on every light in my apartment, backing up against the wall, my hands trembling. The shadow was gone. Just a normal, obedient silhouette again. I didn't sleep that night. Something was wrong, and I was starting to realize I wasn't alone. Chapter 4. The rules have changed. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that twisted version of my shadow. Those hollow eyes, that grotesque grin. By morning, I had convinced myself that exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Maybe it was a visual glitch in my phone's camera. Maybe my mind was fabricating horror out of nothing. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something outside of my own perception. So, I decided to set up an experiment. I placed my phone on my desk, making sure it was perfectly still, and turned on the video recording. Then I positioned myself against the wall, so my shadow was clearly visible. The only light source was my bedroom lamp. I took a deep breath. Then, slowly, I lifted my right hand. The shadow followed. I moved my hand side to side. The shadow did the same. For 2 minutes, nothing unusual happened. My breathing slowed. Maybe I had just imagined everything. Maybe. Then, at the 2-minute mark, something changed. My shadow stopped following me. I blinked, my arm still raised. The shadow stood completely still, its arm lowered. A cold wave of fear crawled up my spine. I slowly dropped my arm to my side. The shadow remained unchanged. I took a step back. The shadow took a step forward. I gasped and stumbled backward, knocking over my chair. My phone fell off the desk, its screen flashing as it landed. The moment I scrambled to grab it, I heard something. A sound I will never forget. A low, raspy whisper, coming from inside the wall. I bolted out of the room. When I finally calmed down enough to check the video, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my phone. I pressed play. For the first 2 minutes, everything was normal. Then, the shadow froze. Then, it moved on its own. And then, just before I knocked the phone over, just before the recording cut out, the shadow turned its head toward the camera, like it knew it was being watched. Chapter 5. When the lights go out for the next few days, I avoided being alone in the dark. I kept every light in my apartment on at all times. My phone battery drained quickly because I refused to turn off the flashlight when moving from room to room. It was ridiculous. I felt like a child afraid of monsters under the bed. But deep down, I knew this was real. The worst part? No one believed me. I tried to show my friend Mark the video, but as soon as I opened my gallery, the file was gone. Vanished. I swore up and down that I hadn't deleted it. He just laughed. "Man, you need sleep," he said. "You're freaking yourself out over nothing." Nothing? I wished it was nothing. That night, as I sat on my couch, forcing myself to watch TV and pretend everything was fine, the power went out. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. My breath caught in my throat. Then, from across the room, a flicker of movement. My heart pounded. My phone was in my pocket. I fumbled for it, nearly dropping it as I turned on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, shaking in my trembling hand. And then, I saw it. My shadow was standing in the center of the room, not attached to the wall, not connected to me. Standing. It was taller than me now. Its head tilted at that unnatural angle, its arms hanging motionless at its sides. And then, as the flashlight flickered, it took a step forward. I ran. I didn't care where, I just needed to get away. I crashed into the kitchen, slamming the door behind me. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. For several agonizing minutes, there was only silence. Then, knock, knock. 2 slow, deliberate knocks on the other side of the door. I held my breath. Then, the whisper, right against the wood. "Let me in." I squeezed my eyes shut. This wasn't happening. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Then, one last knock. and the power came back on. I waited, listening. Silence. When I finally gathered the courage to open the door, my living room was empty. But as I stepped out, something caught my eye. On the wall, stretching in the dim light, was my shadow. Except, it was still facing the wrong way. Chapter 6. The reflections are wrong. For the next few days, I avoided looking at my shadow. I kept my head down when I walked. I made sure my back was always against a wall, so I wouldn't accidentally see it stretching out behind me. If I had to move in the dark, I used multiple light sources to scatter the shadows, so none of them could be mine. But none of it mattered, because it was still watching me. I felt it in every moment of silence, in every flickering light bulb, in every reflection I passed. Then, one night, I made a mistake. I looked into a mirror. It happened so naturally, so normally, that I almost missed it. I was brushing my teeth, exhausted, my mind drifting. Then, as I reached for the towel, I saw it. My reflection wasn't moving correctly. My hand had already grabbed the towel. My reflection's hand was just now reaching for it. I froze. So did it. My breath hitched as I slowly, carefully moved my left hand up. The reflection did the same. I wiggled my fingers. It followed. I exhaled, a nervous laugh escaping me. Just exhaustion. Just my mind playing tricks. Then it blinked. I didn't. A chill shot down my spine. The thing in the mirror blinked first. I stepped back so fast I knocked over a bottle of mouthwash. The clatter echoed through the small bathroom. My reflection didn't move. Then, as I stared, heart pounding, it did something worse. It grinned, a slow, deliberate grin that spread too wide, stretching across its face like a crack in glass. Bolted from the bathroom, slamming the door shut. From the other side, I heard a faint, distorted whisper. "Let me out." I didn't sleep that night. Chapter 7. It doesn't need me anymore. Something changed after that night. Before, the shadow had always been attached to me, even when it moved on its own, even when it didn't quite behave like a normal shadow. It had still been mine. But now it existed without me. It no longer followed me, no longer clung to my feet or stretched across the floor when I moved. And yet, it was still in my house. I caught glimpses of it standing in doorways, in the reflection of my TV when it was off, in the corner of my eye when I turned too quickly. Once, I even saw it outside my window, standing on the street below, staring up at me from the darkness. That's when I knew it didn't need me anymore. It had become something else. That night, I made a decision. I packed a bag, grabbed my car keys. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to leave. But as I stepped toward the door, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. My breath caught in my throat. My phone. I fumbled for my phone. The flashlight clicked on, and it was right there, standing in the hallway, closer than ever. The beam of light hit it, but it cast no shadow of its own. It was just a silhouette, a void in the shape of me. Then, slowly, deliberately, it stepped forward. I backed away, my pulse hammering, and then it spoke, a low, distorted whisper, in my own voice. "You can't leave, not yet." I ran. I didn't think. I just ran, out the door, down the stairs, into my car. I fumbled with the keys, my breath ragged, my hands shaking. The engine roared to life. I looked up, and in the reflection of my rearview mirror, it was sitting in the back seat. Chapter 8. The drive to nowhere. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I acknowledged it, if I looked at it, I was afraid of what might happen. Instead, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My pulse hammered in my ears. The car's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the empty road ahead. I pressed the gas pedal, hard. The engine growled, and the speedometer climbed. Trees blurred past. Streetlights flickered as I shot through intersections. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. But then, a voice, right behind me. "You can't outrun yourself." I nearly lost control. The car swerved. My breath caught in my throat. I still didn't look. The rearview mirror was right there. It would only take a glance. But I forced my eyes to stay on the road. The presence behind me shifted. I could feel it leaning closer, its breath cold against the back of my neck. Then, a hand. A shadowy, impossible hand reached forward, fingers curling around my wrist. I screamed. The car skidded as I yanked the wheel. Tires screeched against pavement. My heart was about to explode. And then I hit something. The impact sent me spinning. My world tilted. Glass shattered. Metal crunched. My body lurched as the car flipped once, twice, then silence. The world was sideways. My head throbbed. The scent of gasoline filled my nose. I was alive. Barely. I groaned, trying to unbuckle myself. The seatbelt had locked tight. My fingers fumbled, shaking, bloody. Then, a whisper. "Are you ready now?" My entire body went cold. I turned my head. The shadow was outside the wreckage, standing just beyond the shattered windshield, waiting, smiling. I blacked out. Chapter 9. Wake up somewhere else when I came to. I wasn't in my car anymore. I wasn't even on the road. I was lying on the floor of a house. My house. But that was impossible. The last thing I remembered was crashing, flipping. There was no way I could be back here. Slowly, I sat up. My limbs ached. My head throbbed. Then I saw the mirror. A tall, full-length mirror stood directly across from me. It hadn't been there before. And in its reflection, I was still lying on the floor. My reflection wasn't moving. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stand. My legs were weak, but I managed to stumble forward. My reflection stayed down. My breath hitched. I raised my hand. It didn't. Then, as I watched, it turned its head on its own. I recoiled, slamming into the wall. My pulse pounded so hard it hurt. The thing in the mirror smiled up at me. "Almost ready," it whispered. Then it stood up. My body didn't move, but it did. I watched, frozen, as my own reflection smoothed down its clothes, rolled its shoulders, and took a deep breath. It stepped closer to the glass. I couldn't move. A terrible, sinking realization hit me. I wasn't in my house. I was in the mirror, and it was outside. It leaned in, placing a hand against the glass. Its voice was mine, but distorted. "Wrong." "Don't worry," it whispered. "I'll take good care of your life." Then it turned and walked away, leaving me trapped. Chapter 10. Trapped in the mirrory, slammed my fists against the glass. "Wait! Stop!" My voice echoed around me, but the reflection, no, the imposter, didn't even flinch. It walked away, rolling its shoulders as if testing my body for the first time. My body. A sickening dread coiled in my stomach. I pounded the glass again. "Come back!" But it was already gone. I was alone. The space around me wasn't just my house. It was a twisted, hollow version of it. The colors were muted, almost desaturated, like an old photograph. The air felt thin, heavy with silence. No warmth, no sound, just an empty, suffocating void. Turned, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The walls stretched impossibly high, curving inward. My reflection was everywhere. Mirrors lined every surface, reflecting me infinitely in every direction. I took a step. The mirrors flickered. For a brief second I saw things, shadowed figures, moving between the reflections, watching, waiting. Then they were gone. I swallowed hard. I had to get out. Somehow, I moved deeper into the mirrored world. With each step, my reflection lagged, just slightly, just enough to make my skin crawl. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Then, a whisper, not from behind me, not from around me, from inside the mirrors. "You're not the first." My breath caught. The whispers grew, overlapping, rising like a suffocating tide. Dozens of voices, hundreds. Some were crying, some were screaming, some were laughing. I turned sharply and saw them. Behind the glass, in every mirror, faces pressed against the surface. People, trapped, just like me. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths moving without sound. Hands clawed against the inside of the mirrors, desperate, pleading. And then, a shape moved toward me. Not in the mirror, behind me. I spun around and nearly collapsed. It was me, but wrong. Its skin was dull, like old wax. Its eyes were too dark, too deep, filled with something endless. Its grin stretched too wide. It lifted a hand, my hand, and placed it against the mirror. The moment our palms met the glass, I felt it, a pulling sensation, like my body was unraveling, like I was being sucked into the glass itself. The last thing I saw was my own twisted, grinning face. Then, darkness. Chapter 11. The Other Side. Don't know how long I was unconscious, or if I even was. Time felt wrong here. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the mirror room anymore. I was outside. At least it looked like outside. But something was off. The sky was colorless, a gray expanse with no sun, no clouds, just an endless empty void stretching in every direction. The air was heavy, thick, pressing against my skin, and the silence. It was deafening, not just quiet, absolute nothingness. I turned in place, scanning my surroundings. Buildings stood around me, familiar yet warped. Copies of the real world, but wrong. Windows were just black voids. Streetlights bent at unnatural angles. The pavement beneath my feet pulsed like something alive. Then, a figure in the distance, standing perfectly still, facing me. I took a step forward. So did it. My stomach twisted. I took another step. So did it. I stopped breathing. Then, it ran at me. I turned and bolted. The world blurred. The air grew heavier. The silence somehow louder. My pulse pounded as I sprinted down the empty street. The thing behind me was fast, gaining on me with every second. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Then, I saw it. A mirror, standing alone in the middle of the street. I didn't think. I just ran straight for it. The moment I reached it, I threw myself at the glass and crashed through. Chapter 12. Back, but not alone. I hit the ground hard, gasping. I was back in my room. The light was dim, the air familiar, the silence no longer suffocating. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing. My hands trembled as I checked myself. I was me. My body felt real again, solid. I was home. I let out a shaky breath, laughing weakly. I made it. Then, something moved in the mirror. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head, and my stomach dropped. The mirror was wrong, because my reflection wasn't copying me. It was just standing there, smiling, and then it whispered, "Are you sure you're home?" Chapter 13. The final reflection. I stared at the mirror, my chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. The reflection didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. It just smiled. A slow, stretching grin that wasn't mine. That had never been mine. A cold realization gripped me. I wasn't alone. I took a cautious step back. My reflection didn't follow. It tilted its head as if amused. Then, it spoke. "You ran, but you never escaped." A shiver crawled up my spine. "You're not real," I whispered. The reflection laughed, a twisted, warped sound, like something trying to mimic human laughter but failing. Then it stepped forward. Not in the mirror. Into my room. I stumbled backward as the surface of the glass rippled like water. And then, it was out. I wasn't alone in my own house. It was here, and it was me. Only, it wasn't. Its movements were too smooth, too precise, like a marionette without strings. Its eyes were darker, deeper, filled with something endless, something hungry. "You don't belong here anymore," it whispered. I turned to run, but the room had changed. The walls melted into endless mirrors. There was no door, no way out, only reflections. Hundreds of them. But none of them were me. I spun in place, panic clawing at my throat. The reflections were wrong. Twisted versions of me, grinning, laughing, waiting. I wasn't trapped in my house anymore. I was trapped in the mirror. And it was in my world. Chapter 14. The Last Chance. No, I refused to let it take my life. I turned. Toward the thing wearing my face. "Let me out." It just smiled. "I am you now." I lunged. I didn't care if it was a mistake. I refused to disappear. My fist connected with the thing's chest, but it didn't feel like a body. It felt like smoke, like something intangible and wrong. But it staggered. For the first time, the grin faltered, and I knew I could fight. I reached deep into myself, searching for something real, something true. The mirrors around me flickered. For a second, I saw faces, the ones trapped here before me. Their eyes wide, their mouths whispering, they were watching. No, they were waiting. I wasn't the first, but I could be the last. I turned, scanning the infinite reflections. Somewhere in this nightmare, there had to be an exit. Then, I saw it. One mirror standing apart from the rest. Unlike the others, its surface wasn't twisted. It was clear. I ran. Behind me, the thing wearing my face let out a screech. The other reflections moved, reaching, clawing, trying to stop me. I dodged, weaved, ran faster. The closer I got to the clear mirror, the more the world rippled. The walls shook. The reflections screamed. I threw myself forward and crashed through the glass. Chapter 15. The final escape eye hit the ground, gasping. I was back. The air was sharp, real. The floor was solid beneath my hands. I scrambled up, heart hammering, turning toward the mirror. The thing wearing my face was still inside, trapped. Its grin was gone. It slammed against the glass, eyes wild. "No!" It howled. The other reflections screamed with it, their voices warping, twisting into something inhuman. The mirror shook, cracks spreading across the surface like veins, and then it shattered. The screams cut off. The shards fell to the ground. Nothing but broken glass. No shadows, no reflections, no monster. I stood there, chest heaving, the silence heavy around me. It was over, or so I thought. Epilogue. The last glance days passed. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, that I was safe, that nothing had followed me back. But something felt wrong. Every time I passed a mirror, I felt it. A pause, a hesitation, like something was watching. One night I dared to look, really look. And in the dim glow of my bedroom, I saw a flicker, a grin, not mine. Then it was gone, but I knew it was still there, waiting, and one day it would try again.